we're in this interesting little chasm in dentistry right now where we're starting to look at essential versus non-essential. What is the work that we're really doing? How does that impact this, community? What does that mean for society? And ultimately, this is our opportunity, I think, to rebrand dentistry. Tell them things that are real to them. Tell them things that make sense to them and can link back to the consequences that are so real for them. That's where you build that true value in the work that we do as clinicians. And that's where you're going to get your optimized case acceptance for patients. It's not the good old boys club anymore. There's a dialogue, there's a conversation, there's a mutual respect, for the hygienist and the skills and the talents and the gifts that they can bring to the practice. And I think that's just a huge way that even from an educational standpoint, we've started to change the conversation for our patients and as an industry.
Get ready for your unofficial dental hygiene podcast. These are the tales of two hygienists, one East Coast RDH and one West Coast hygienist. Listen as they tackle the profession of dental hygiene with humor and enthusiasm. Now, please join Michelle Strange and Andrew Johnston as they tell you a tale of two hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists, episode number 231. My name is Andrew.
And this is Michelle. 5, 6, 7, 8. No? Not going to feel it?
I'm not feeling it. I am not feeling it.
I was trying to make him do a 5, 6, 7, 8 after one of my favorite podcasts right now, which is all about the Scrubs podcast and Zach Braff and Donald Faison. They do this count in, and I thought that'd be funny. But anyway, I guess Andrew is not a part of my shenanigans today, so I guess we'll just get into the dental podcast.
No, it's the same old stuff. It's like I don't understand the connection because I don't listen to it. But it'd be very much like I listened to one.
I thought you listened to it.
I started it, but it got too boring for me. So it'd be very similar, though. There's a show called Oh Hello, the podcast. Right, you're not going to understand it, but the guy's name is Gil Faison, and he talks about Donald Faison. And he's like, coincidence? No. So you don't get the reference. It's funny to me.
No, but I thought you listened to it because we talked about this.
I started it. I started when it came out, and then I was like, okay, this is too much. Too much.
Okay. Well, anyway, we're glad that you guys are here and you're listening to A Tale of Two Hygienists. We have a really fun month, I think, for June. But before we get into that, we got some reviews to talk about.
Oh, crap. Let me pull them up because I was Johnny on the spot. Oh, not music. Apple Podcasts. That's so funny when I say.
So we very much appreciate if you guys rate and review us. It's, it's just the name of the game. It's like Google reviews, Yelp. The more you got, the more they can see you. So if you're in the mood, you're enjoying the podcast, you've had a few guests that have taught you something, we would love for you to rate and review us. And we have a new way to do that, right?
We do. We have a very, very simple, in the show notes of all of our episodes and or should be in all of our episodes. We might have forgotten the last 3 weeks. There's a little like a link that you can just click, and whatever device you're on, it'll take you to whatever the app that you like to use for podcasts. And you can go there and rate us on whether it's Stitcher or Podcast Addict or Apple, Google, wherever. You can go right onto that. We are
favorite podcasting apps.
They're called podcatchers. I don't know if you knew that. That's the term for a podcasting app. It's a podcatcher.
Why?
Because it catches your pods, I guess. I don't know. Because the RSS feed is thrown into the world, and then it catches it and brings it to you.
I did not know that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
For making me hip to the podcast lingo.
You're welcome. We're so far behind, by the way, on these reviews. We have 4 that we're going to read today. I apologize if I read 1 or 2 of them already. I kind of lost track of where we're at, but here we go. This is from Ladybug RD8, 5 stars. Love it.
Cute.
I am currently a dental hygiene student, class of 2020. I am so glad I started listening to you guys. You have challenged me to be a better hygienist by always learning and pursuing further education and not to be complacent. You cover a lot of good topics and have good interviews. I tell people about this podcast all the time.
Well, thanks, Ladybug RD8.
Yes, that was really nice.
Cute little handle. Love that. And good on you being a student. We've talked about this one before on the podcast, but I don't know if I could have mentally handled anything and more
overload
in school. You and I also have talked about how we worked our butts off the entire time we were in hygiene school, which was kind of frowned upon. I think with both of our schools.
For sure.
So yeah, I don't think I had the mental capacity to. And also, I was a little bit of an overachiever, must graduate number one of class or I was going to die. So mentally, I could not take any more. And plus, waiting tables nights and weekends was rough. But you students that are listening to a podcast while in school, you are awesome. I cannot wait for you to be a part of our profession.
I agree.
Okay. Next one.
Kathleen, I think this is Kathleen Squire, I think is her name. I think I've seen her name on a couple other things. She's messaged us before, but it's Kathleen School is what it says on here. 5 stars. Learning continues. Hi, COVID-19 has me out of work since early March. I am thankful to be home and have some time to spend with my family until it's safe to go back to work. Along with helping my son with schoolwork and catching up with projects I never had time for. I also plug into my favorite dental podcast to keep my mind in the field. So when it's time to return to work, I will be ready and educated. Thank you guys for always keeping your episodes current and keeping me in the quote, dental now. Ooh, I like that term.
Ooh, I like that.
That is clever.
That's fantastic. Dental now. One of the things that you and I talked about was like, are we going to have like a dip in downloads and stuff because people aren't commuting? Granted, now everybody's going back and we're kind of back into the swing of things. But in March, when she wrote this, we were like, oh, we're going to see a dip in downloads. And I was just listening to Armchair Expert, and Dax was also having kind of a mental breakdown. Like, is this going to are we going to have less people listening to us? And what we found is like people found new normals.
Yeah.
It dipped. And then everyone was like, okay, well, I'm homeschooling these kids while I'm going to put some headphones in.
That's their escape.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, May was a banner month for us again. I mean, everyone's just out there sharing it and enjoying it. So
it's awesome.
Okay. The next one, again, another 5-star best dental podcast from KC101010274744826.
Well, dang.
And they say, I have been listening to your podcast for a few years and love it. Well-rounded information and amazing guests. It recharged my desire to be a myofunctional therapist and put me in touch with Sarah Hornsby.
Yay. That's amazing.
That is what we're talking about, everyone. Taking that initiative to contact the guests. Oh, I love it.
Absolutely.
Okay, last one. Loyal listener for years, 5 stars from MEEE66555588.
Is this something that just happens where they create handles for you?
I mean, that's like one of the things you can select.
Is it like the password?
Make my own.
Google's like, let me create a password
suggest
for you.
Yeah, I like that.
Like, no, Google, I got this.
Like for our bank account, right? For the podcast, you're like, what is this that you gave me? And I'm like, just go with it. It's fine. Like, no one will ever break that thing.
Yeah.
How many weird symbols can we put into one password? That's the question. Okay. So they say, I have listened to A Tale of Two Hygienists for years. I find the high quality information to be essential for me to help guide my continuing education and stay abreast of emerging science and trends in the industry. The topics have led me to learn more about implant care, myofunctional therapy, patient communication, infection control, motivational interviewing, and so much more. I love that many of the episodes have CE credits available, and then I can listen in my own time and my own way. I'm grateful for Michelle and my fellow West Coast hygienist, Andrew, for the work that goes into creating amazing content with a fun delivery.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, that's way awesome.
The West Coaster. That's awesome.
Wow. That's a lot of love. I don't know how we're ever going to fit our egos through the door anymore. That's dang.
So true. No, we very much appreciate those because, like I said, it's just you and me like talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we ever forget that we have these people listening to us on the other end, but sometimes you forget the magnitude of people that you're reaching. And, our guests, gosh, they're just the best. Like they come on and they give us such good content and they're so encouraging, and the lives that our guests and us have touched that then go on to touch others with patient care. I mean, gosh, it's the best. It's just the best.
Just the best.
It is. So this month is amazing. If you listened, you've been a long time listener, you heard something called the Great Perio Debate that Andrew and I had very early on.
The Andrew won early on.
Well, no, I think we have both come to terms with neither one of us winning.
In the moment I won.
Way too, no.
Okay.
Definitely
Okay.
not. Oh, that's adorable. You think that. Anywho, so this is about perio. And this is something that I love so, so much. But even with me, I kind of, I took a little side street and went down the home care implant world for quite a few years and didn't delve into the bacteria and the science, the testing and the salivary testing. And then you and I were actually present for the AAP EFP classification stuff. And unfortunately, I heard it, but my clinic, we did not, I'm trying to even get yearly perio probing. So we don't do insurance. We don't do any of that. So I haven't really honestly been able to practice it much. So I'm trying to slowly implement that. And Katrina Sanders, she's the guest today, really helped to break that down for me. I've dabbled in it. I'm like, oh, okay, I think this is gingivitis. And I've done it for implants because now we finally have a healthy category for dental implants. So I was really on top of the classifications for implants, but not so much the other stuff. And it's a little overwhelming, but I think she did a beautiful job of breaking it down for us to use. And oh my gosh, just the stuff. She was super empowering. We obviously all know that we need to do a better job at diagnosing perio. Otherwise, we're never going to have insurance coverage because we don't have data. And, CDC's been saying for years that, 40 or, oh gosh, I usually know the statistics, but it's almost like 2 in 1. Every 2 people, 1 person's got perio for the most part. However, I don't even know where they got those stats from. I would even say that it's way more of the population actually has perio, because I could walk into any given Walmart and it's probably like 75%. But anywho, what you got? What is your
Nothing. Look, we're not going to go down that debate again about the percentages of perio and how I think they're super inflated and how you think that they're underreported.
Well, how can you even say that with the grading?
Well, I know. And that's the other thing too, is with isolated factors and then grading to the worst portion of the mouth, even if it's only one section. Thinking this one patient I have very specifically, I don't think it was wisdom tooth induced, but it was the distal buccal of number 31. And I don't think that they had that. But anyway, there's a 9mm pocket with bone loss. And technically that is perio because I don't think she had wisdom teeth. So anyway, so it's just okay, well, so apparently, yeah, she has perio, but is that really the spirit of what we're talking about of a person who has perio disease? Anyways, another tangent.
Disease is disease, though. And that's the thing. Okay.
So
disease is disease.
So rather than listening to me,
but on with your argument, originally, because the healthy reduced periodontium, healthy one reduced period. Well, that is a thing, an actual category now.
Right.
So I feel like it serves both you and your argument and my argument.
Sure.
The perio classifications, because it helps to, I think, clarify some of the nuances. I think.
Yeah.
Before
and it's a flexible system, right?
Yes,
so if we need to adjust, we absolutely can.
Exactly. So I know that you guys are going to have just so many questions, or it's going to clarify things. And I said in this interview that if you do have any questions, maybe we can bring Katrina back on for a Facebook Live and we could do some live Q&A. So write them down, not while you're driving or anything, go back, listen to this later. and then write those down, send them in, direct message us on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And until then, enjoy this episode with Katrina Sanders.
Hey, Michelle.
Yeah.
It's time for the interview.
Oh, but I had something else to say.
We need to let the experts talk now.
Fine. So everyone, I'm really excited for this series. You all know I'm such a perio nerd, and I cannot believe it has taken me this long to have an entire series on this. But I'm really excited to welcome our guest that is going to be some of you probably known or heard of, or I feel like you're everywhere. So welcome to Katrina Sanders, the dental Winegenist, to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I'm so excited to be here. And I'm even more excited to be able to geek out with you on Perio Talk. This is going to be awesome.
I love it. So you are a practicing dental hygienist. How long have you been doing this?
I've been a practicing dental hygienist for almost 13 years. Can you believe it? It feels like
it sneaks up on you.
It does. I know. I feel like I just graduated like yesterday. But yeah, I'm a practicing dental hygienist. Been practicing for 13 years. I practice here in Phoenix, Arizona. I currently practice for AZPerio. We are the country's largest periodontal practice, and my job with them is actually really cool. We have a type of hygienists in the perio practice that see maintenance and prophy patients. And then we have another type of hygienist who works alongside our periodontists and goes in and does, when they do surgical flaps and laser-assisted osseous procedures. Sounds like you do the same thing.
I did. That was my first job. And I was a periodontist, and I flip-flop between surgical assisting and hygiene.
To me, it's so cool because you see, not cool, like we're geeking out on it. So it's like, who cares?
It's so cool. It's so cool.
You get to see this disease in such an intimate way. I do a lot of, programmatic content as well, which is how you and I have met, over the however long we've known each other. And so when I speak on perio content, it's really interesting because I get to kind of unpack for the audience members what this disease looks like when you flap it back and you can actually see those bony defects. We go in blindly, right? Like we're probing and we're like, I don't know whatever I'm feeling or what's happening. Everything's like by feel. So to be able to see this disease and to really watch the manifestation of it move in these patients and to understand that oral systemic component has just been very cool. So I've
100%.
definitely gotten my, I'm still a wet fingered hygienist and I love that. And I don't know if I will ever not practice. There's something very warm and humbling for me about being in the operatory and doing the thing that you and I speak on, which of course leads me to the other layer of the work that I do, which is as a speaker in continuing dental education content. As you mentioned, I'm the dental Winegenist. So I'm a level 1 sommelier, which is a wine expert according to the Court of Master Sommeliers. I'm not just like some crazy ginger that drinks wine in her kitchen by herself and calls herself an expert. I actually have a pin. And so I've found a way to be able to combine my love of dentistry, my love of wine, mush it together into this career that has really been able to help me stand on platforms and share my knowledge about gum disease and infection control and all the things. I am a self-proclaimed dental nerd. So for me, being able to geek out with you on all of this content is like amazing. And it's really where I get my kicks. So thank you again for having me. And I'm just grateful to be part of this.
Oh, it's really fun. And our listeners are all like screaming at us, like, we're dental nerds too. Anyone who's going to listen to an hour and something long dental hygiene podcast, there are people, right? Like it's a very unique, engaged, just a super smart, smarty pants audience. I'm so proud of all of them. You bring up such a great point about understanding the level of disease when you can flap that tissue back and really get in there and understand. And the one thing, so I left dental hygiene school and got the job before I even left and graduated. And I started as a surgical assistant while I was waiting for my license to come, because this was so long ago. You didn't get that immediate thing. Like you had
That's right. You had to wait 6 weeks for the paper to show up.
And weeks and weeks. You already had your degree, but you couldn't practice. And then you had to wait even longer for anesthesia.
I know.
Oh man. But so as a surgical assistant, that was fascinating to see. And then to do this non-surgical scaling and then go into that osseous surgery was incredibly humbling.
Yes.
Incredibly.
Yes. Yes.
And
we
it
think
was
we're
really
like amazing with our, and we are amazing with our scalers, but it is incredible when doc flaps that back and you're like, oh, so that, how long has that calculus been sitting there? And the patient has been root planed and root planed and, you know, I mean, it's very eye opening.
But it's also such a great learning experience because when you know you didn't get it and you can go in there and like, what was that I was struggling with? Like, or you see why you felt it with an Explorer, but you couldn't get that big Gracie into that curvy part of the I mean, it was incredibly humbling, and it made me a really good scaler. I'd like to believe, because I got to see the anatomy and then had it in my mind's eye when I would go in there. But I'll tell you what's changed since I was in that practice has been a lot of the understanding of how we treat disease. You know, the oral systemic was not a part of, it wasn't, I mean, it was on our radar a little bit. We tested for C-reactive proteins and we did some of those things. But it really wasn't on the radar until I really left about 5 years ago. And then I started hearing this and I think back to those patients and I'm like, man, this was it. This is why I couldn't get them healthy. This is why I was seeing them on a monthly basis for maintenance, because there was this key element of the systemic part that I just didn't have.
Yeah. And what an incredible opportunity for us. I think, you know, as of the date of the recording of this podcast, we're in this interesting little chasm in dentistry right now where we're starting to look at essential versus non-essential. What is the work that we're really doing? How does that impact this, you know, community? What does that mean for society? And ultimately, this is our opportunity, I think, to rebrand dentistry. For people to understand that the work that we're doing, in my opinion, when you see some of these perio maintenances, and you've seen these, are these elective procedures, or are some of these patients seriously experiencing higher levels of inflammation? And we see that correlation, we see that movement back and forth. How validating is that for us as clinicians to know that we're a part of that? And I'll say, to your point, I had a patient of mine who his wife is a nurse, and he came in because he had a lot of a generalized perio infection and then a localized perio abscess. So we had treatment planned laser assisted osseous surgery and then extraction and drainage of the, you know, tooth that had the perio abscess, and then eventually, you know, membrane bone graft, you know, implant, the whole shebang. And the wife was measuring these C-reactive proteins and interleukin and prostaglandin levels. Like she had his like basically breakdown throughout, like from the beginning, because he's a diabetic. So, and then she had A1C as well that she was monitoring. But, you know, from the beginning of this whole process all the way through. And it was incredible because you saw this just dramatic drop in prostaglandin E2, interleukin 1, C-reactive proteins, like all of them in tandem. I mean, just a shoot down. And so I asked her, I'm like, what's this drop here? And she's like, well, that was 2 days after that tooth was removed. And it's 2 days. Like, what? I know. It was incredible. I mean, granted, albeit we had him on antibiotic, you know, because he was a diabetic and, you know, perio abscess. And what was incredible to see is oftentimes, I think when we approach perio from a non-surgical general practice space, we don't get to see that. How do we evaluate healing on a patient? We probe the patient, we stick them with the metal thing and see if they bleed. That's how we evaluate healing. And it's incredible because every other area of medicine, when they're evaluating healing, they are gathering, you know, CBCs, they're gathering blood samples, they're evaluating, you know, nutritional components. I mean, they are assessing it. And so for me to watch that happen, I think was, again, humbling, but also very eye-opening to the fact that
like a light bulb, right?
It's a light bulb goes off. We can't sit and watch this infection continue to grow in our patients, continue to manifest. We can't sit back and tell our patients, everything looks fine. Let's go ahead and polish you up today and get you on with the rest of your day. You know, we aren't serving anybody by doing that. In fact, we have, in my opinion, tarnished our brand as clinicians. This is the provocative part of talking to the dental hygienist.
I love it.
You know, we've tarnished our own brand. You know, when you ask, I'm back on the dating scene. So it's delightful as you would imagine. And you go on
It's
like
not.
a first
I'm
date.
always
It's
on the
horrible. I
dating
hate
scene.
it.
Not
I
delighted.
know. It's the worst thing ever. So, you go on like a first date and they're like, oh, what do? And you're like, I'm a dental hygienist, and it's interesting to even listen to what the reputation or brand of a hygienist is. These guys are like, oh, I floss. Like, that's like the first thing they say. It's like, why did you think that was going to be my first question was like flossing? Like, I
Because
want to know
we
who your
did it to
dentist
ourselves.
is. I want to know your perio charting number. No, I'm kidding. But, my whole thing is.
Who cares about credit scores?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I want to know your perio charting score first. I want to know your bleeding score. Then I want to know your credit score. Thank you. But, my whole concern with that is, we have been deemed as the people that are like, you need to floss, 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 floss. We're the cute little bubbly ones in the office that everybody loves. And we want to hear about your little vacation. And I want to see the pictures of your trips to Costa Rica and all these little things, which I think is amazing. Anybody who knows me knows I love talking to my patients, even the ones that are sedated. I talk to, they don't know I'm talking to them,
they'll talk back.
I talk to them. They won't talk back.
They will talk back.
Me. So, but I think we need to move past that. If we want to be these mid-level providers that we are striving to be, all of the hygienists out there that are listening and totally geek out on this stuff, these microbiome nerds, and like, we're all microbiome nerds, right? Like learning about bacteria and like geeking out on like gram-negative anaerobic bacteria and the peptidoglycan layer and all that baloney. If we're going to geek out on these things, and we need to kick up a seat to that table and say, listen, we're providers too. Yes, I do want to hear about how my patients are doing, because there's a humanistic quality to what I do, but ultimately I am here as a professional, and so you need to respect me as such. I need to walk into the practice every day as such. I need to be that on social media. I need to be that in every layer of what it is that I do, because ultimately we're not serving patients by abandoning those new areas or those new layers of what we're doing in dentistry. So I'm thrilled. We need to be rebranding. We need the community to know about the close work that we do, the exposure rate that we have, the amount of infection that we are constantly treating. We need to take an active role in that. We need to rebrand. We need society to know what we do. And ultimately, I think we need to look at how we move forward. Where do we go from here in addressing these inflammatory conditions that we are so highly skilled and trained in treating?
100%. Like, let's stop talking about selective polishing and let's like really have some real conversations that make a difference in our patients' health.
Absolutely. How many times do you do the world's most gorgeous SRP, but you don't polish the patient? And so you get to the end and the patient's like, are you going to clean my teeth? And you're like, really, sir? Because I just anesthetized you. I accessed areas that probably no other human has ever accessed before in your subgingival space, but you're concerned because I didn't polish you with the pumice, right?
100%. Yeah.
We need to change that.
I don't get pushback from my patients. I just don't. I don't get the pushback from them. And if I do, the conversation is, I am so sorry I did not explain this, what I was doing for you. Tell me what you think was going to happen today and what you think a cleaning is, because I really want to clear this up, because me polishing your teeth is not it. So they don't argue with me. Like, I don't get that pushback, but I have these conversations with patients about like what to expect during their appointment and all of that.
I love that you say that, because I struggle with that too. I don't get that pushback. And I'm sure you are in the same boat, where I'm being asked to build out like communications coursework and communications content. And, I always tell this story. You're a dog lover, so you're going to get this. When you go on the road and then you come home, and you see your sweet little baby and you get down on your hands and knees and, oh, who's your sweet little baby, right? I do the same thing with my dogs, particularly my dog Baxter. I'll get down on you and oh, Baxter, I love you. And anybody who has a dog knows that when you get down on your hands and knees and you do the mommy doggy voice, the dog's going to wag their tail no matter what. You could say to that dog, I love you, and I'm going to give you, I'm going to give you kisses, and they'll wag their tail. But you could also say, you have stinky breath and you need to get your teeth cleaned tomorrow. And they're still going to, they don't care. The thing is,
such a good analogy.
Just like with dogs, it's true. Because with dogs, it's not necessarily what you're saying, but how you're saying it. Right. And the same layer, in my opinion, is true even when you take a look at some of the terminology. So with Baxter, I could say, oh, I love you. You're the sweetest boy in the whole wide world. And I'm going to give you a TREAT. I have to spell it because
or they'll come
my right now. Yeah. They're going to come running. You know what I mean? So if I say that word, it's like he perks up. So there are things or terminologies or pieces that we as clinicians can say to get our patients to perk up. And so from a communication standpoint, and the AAP staging and grading has been an awesome layer to that for us. But, from a communication standpoint, I agree. I have not had that challenge because for me, I have gone back to co-discovery. We do the perio charting together. I'm not doing this. I hate that. And when I speak on this, everyone in the room kind of laughs and like awkwardly like nods their head. You know what I'm talking about? Where you're probing the patient and you're like, oh, so how was your trip to Rome last summer? And you're like probing, and then you like turn and you put your hand behind you and you go 3, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
While you're talking to the patient's like, oh, I was in Rome and I had some really great wine and blah, blah, blah. And then they stop talking. So that's your chance, right? You get your hand right back in their mouth. And then you probe the anteriors. You're on the distal of that canine, number 6, and you're probing and you're like, that's so awesome. I would love to go to Italy at some point, but right now I'm just busy cleaning teeth. Then you're done, right? So now the patient can talk. And while the patient's talking, you reach behind you again. And now you go 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, right?
Yeah.
The reality is like, how many times do we see those perio charts, the 3, 2, 3 perio charts, like over and over and over again? And after you've had a dialogue with the patient and you've just done the perio charting, now you're going to set the patient up and say, there are areas of inflammation and infection in the mouth. The patient has no idea what just happened. You just poked that. Yeah. They're not even along on this journey with you. They've been talking about Rome. They're literally in Rome. And you are here trying to have a dialogue about what's going on. And so we're missing the mark. And so I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to change that conversation. Our patients need to take this appointment seriously. Yes, I love socializing with my patients, but there's a time and a place for that socialization.
Yeah, I agree. And so I personally use VoiceWorks, and it's a full on 3, 2, 3 bleeding.
Yep.
Bleeding, half tooth bleeding, full tooth bleeding. It hears it and it gives it back to you. And it is, and I tell them what I am doing if they are not somebody that's familiar with my process. Well, they're also fascinated by the technology and everything, but you're right. Like they aren't on that journey. They're on their vacation or whatever, thinking about their grandkids. And, one of the things that, we're recording this as, the stay-at-home orders are kind of being lifted and we're really starting to come back into practice. And while I've been doing all these infection prevention courses and having these conversations about how do you prepare your office to go back, one of my things was like, can we really start to reassess the clutter and the nonsense in our practices? And as much as I truly believe that it feels nice to make it your home or make it feel cozy, because we do have a fear that we have to deal with some of our patients, it doesn't scream medical to me. And we're over here like, take us serious. And then we walk in and we got like stuffed animals with teeth and stuff. And I'm like, this is not
Bath and Body Works. Okay.
This is like spa. And now I think you're right. We've tarnished, but I think we've done that in a lot, in different layers.
So many layers. Oh my gosh. I worked in an office where the patient would sit down and I would grab the remote and I'd be like, okay, so what channel would you
too.
Like? CNN, Nickelodeon, what would you
Food Network? Like, what are we going to watch? Oprah's on. It's 4 o'clock.
Like, would you like pretzels? There are exits off the back wings and in the back. What am I? Am I a dental hygienist or am I like a concierge? Or it's ridiculous. And I get it. We wanted patients to feel comfortable. We wanted that patient experience. The reality is that at the end of the day, I think no matter what, the patient experience and the patient being comfortable is you making those patients feel comfortable. When I meet my patients, I'm practicing right now in the state of Arizona. We've been able to see patients for, surgical procedures and, hygiene recall appointments. So even though I am in, level 3 mask just to go out to the reception area to get my patients. Hi, my name is Katrina. How are you today? I'm so glad that you're here. I'm looking forward to seeing you. Come on back. We're going to be all the way down in this back room. I'm not like, come with me. We're going to be this, and then I sit down with the patient. How's your day today? Are you having a good day? How's the weather looking outside? Do you have any fun plans after this? There are ways to make the patient feel comfortable. There are ways we need to go back to even walking the patient through the appointment. Things are going to feel and look different different now. They certainly are in my operatory. And I make fun of it, it looks like I'm in a spacesuit. I promise I'm not, and all these things. Those are things that help just lighten the mood, make the patient feel comfortable. Right. Those are patients that are going to feel more comfortable about asking you questions about what's going on in their mouth. Think about the intimate nature of somebody literally writing on their health history if they have any sexually transmitted, infections or diseases. Now we're talking about HPV. We're screening patients for herpetic lesions. We're literally like
airway,
accosting them. I know, grabbing Mel and Patty, all these things, we're asking them their family history, genetics, we're asking them about nutrition, stress, hormones, if they may be experiencing infertility, erectile dysfunction. How intimate is all of this? And we're sitting here and we're the uncomfortable ones because we're scared to tell the patient they might benefit from a fluoride varnish. It's like, who's the vulnerable one? The one tipped back in the chair with their mouth open, who's now concerned
in a very intimate, very vulnerable, intimate position. Yeah,
totally. So I think the more that we can be confident and comfortable in what it is that we're doing, the more that is going to relate directly to the patient and help them understand that they can trust us and that we're here with their best interest at heart.
Great points. And, the one thing that I really wanted to talk to you about today is the new classifications. That is very different from when I started in my perio practices. We had juvenile and we had aggressive.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And we had all of these early, I'm trying to remember them all because now they're all mixed in my head. But I was lucky enough to attend the AZPerio meeting in Amsterdam when this was presented. And when it came out, I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And then I came back home and I didn't practice it because it wasn't going to serve us just yet because the insurance companies weren't going to be on it. And there wasn't really clear. And we've made some changes since the EFP put that out. So I really would love for you to break this down like I am a newbie student rolling into hygiene for the first time. What do we do with these new classifications?
Oh my gosh. Yes, let's do it. Okay. So first thing that I want to say, I travel and I speak on these, the staging and grading, and I'll ask a poll of the room of hygienists. And it's interesting. There's actually a very small group of hygienists that actually use a diagnosis in their clinical charting and in their patient education. Most of the time, hygienists are drawing a line in the sand and saying either gingivitis or perio. And then as far as what, flavor or spice level of perio, so to speak, not very many hygienists are/have been using any of that diagnostic terminology.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been kind of interesting because I get a lot of questions about, I do course content on CDT coding and billing. And of course, the number one question is like, why are my claims denied? And it's like, well, did you put in a diagnosis? Because my sister's a surgeon. She's a foot and ankle surgeon. So in order for her to cut off someone's foot, she has to have a diagnosis as to why she's cutting that foot off. Many of us are not currently employing any type of diagnostics. Right.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I would like to put these into perspective. We amputate body parts on the reg.
Right.
We extract these teeth.
Chokes.
No diagnosis.
No diagnosis.
But your sister's over there. That would not fly in medicine.
No. Well, and that's exactly it. Even just saying terminology, dentists will say things like hopeless prognosis to the tooth. You have to diagnose why the tooth is coming out. Is it advanced perio? Is it an endodontic lesion? Is it a root fracture? So many times we don't even have a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And then do you have a legal foot to stand on with regards to that patient? If something happens, what do? The other layer to that then becomes, now we're sending this to the insurance company, and the insurance company has to interpret what it is that you just did and try to figure that out. So the challenge, of course, then becomes, are your claims being denied because you don't have a diagnosis or you're not submitting the right information? It's interesting as well, because I'll put up information on slides. I'll show perio charting and x-rays. And I'll say, what do you guys think? What would be your diagnosis? And I'll ask a room full of hygienists, and they'll say, well, we don't have enough information. That x-rays, got overlap on it. That x-ray is a horizontal bite wing and you can't even see the bone on it. That perio chart only has, 535 all the way across. There's no bleeding. There's no recession. So how could we say that, Katrina, based on what's on here? And it's like, how
I'm
many
like,
of you,
yeah.
right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. How many of us take bite wings where the bone is not visible because we took a horizontal bite wing on a patient who has perio, and in industry standard is you take vertical bite wings on these patients. How many times are you submitting perio charting that for a long time we thought as long as you've got 5s on that perio chart, you're okay. Well, it turns out there's a greater layer to that. You have to be able to show that's an active infection. You have to show that there's bleeding or, that there are furcations or whatever the challenge may be. And so the issue, of course, becomes step one is we have to gather these assessments. We have to have the right assessments in order to basically do, the work that we're doing. So then, okay, next layer to this. This is what ends up happening. We have been utilizing different types of classification systems. We have not been calibrated as an industry. So when I would go and I travel and I'd ask those of you who are using a diagnostic term, how many of you are using the 1999 classifications? That would be classification 0 healthy, classification 1 gingivitis, classification 2 chronic perio, 3 aggressive, 4 perio as a manifestation of systemic, et cetera, et cetera. And I get these it's like crickets. Everyone's looking around like, what is she even talking about? Because the AAP did release classifications in 1999 and I liked them. I was faculty for many years and we taught our hygiene students this classification system because that's what they needed to know for national boards. But what I really liked about that was the fact that it clarified the complexity of the disease process. It had classifications in there, for example, like abscesses of the periodontium. So you could take you could say this particular tooth is experiencing, a perioendo lesion or pericornitis, right? Like, distal of 18, 17 is coming in. And so we're getting pericornitis. So now we're getting an advanced pocket over there. Am I going to scale and root plane that? Probably not. I'm going to send that patient to the oral surgeon to have that addressed. And so it created this opportunity to add another layer of complexity to what we understood about perio, right? It was the first time that we had integrated classifications like perio as a manifestation of systemic disease. Great opportunity for us to now say, because the patient has a systemic disease, we are now seeing subsequent attachment loss associated with that systemic disease. So again, awesome. We love it. However, most people weren't using it because A, it was confusing. B, there were too many classifications. C, I don't know in 1999 if people were traveling and speaking on it, but it seemed like it certainly people weren't doing like podcasting and stuff on this. And, it wasn't readily available. People weren't like on the World Wide Web, like, oh, let's look this up. You were going on like microfiche at your library or whatever, I just made that up. I don't know if people really did microfiche in 1999, but anyway, so, the whole point was that the 1999 classifications, although I liked them as an educator and I used them as a clinician, they were very confusing and very difficult to integrate into clinical practice. What most clinicians were using were the case types. Case type 1 is gingivitis. Case type 2 is mild perio. Case type 3, moderate perio. Case type 4, severe perio. And then you had a couple of other flavors in there, like juvenile perio or aggressive periodontitis, right? Like those are the ones that we're all comfy and cozy with. And the challenge with that is that you're simply looking at a very one-dimensional approach to perio. And then where do you draw that line in the sand between severe perio and aggressive perio? That can be very confusing in and of itself, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you draw that line in the sand? And of course, we're talking about communication earlier on in this segment. And we were talking, for example, about, Baxter and these buzzwords, right? Like TREAT or WALK, right? If I were to use those words, that's a buzzword. Baxter associates that term with something, right? And to him, there's a whole emotional layer to it, kind of like Pavlov, right? Well, what we were saying to patients, those of us who were diagnosing our patients, we were saying things like, you have mild perio. To us, because we're hygienists and we're like OCD, like obviously, like we don't want to have any disease, right? We're all A+ students, but to a patient, saying that they have any type of mild anything is, to most patients, really not that big of a deal. I hate to say it,
yeah.
but you know, they don't really hear that. Even when you say moderate, like, I don't know, I'm a moderate drinker. Does that make me like a bad person? Like, I don't think so. Everything in moderation, right? So the challenge becomes, even the terminology that we were using, pun intended, was not inflammatory enough to help our patients understand the complexity of the disease process. So the World Federation came together. It's important for people to know that this was a global effort. It was a way for us to calibrate globally how it is that we approach the diagnostics of perio. And I think this is going to give us a lot of really great information when we talk about research opportunities, identifying prevalence, incidence, things like that. I think that calibration is going to be really nice, because some of the challenges that we've had in pulling research studies is if it comes from India, if it comes from, you know, Britain, other areas where maybe they're not as calibrated with what our standards have been in the United States, that can be very challenging. So they came together, put a bunch of periodontists in a room with Michelle Strange in the back, waving her flag, right? Yay, perio! And they came up with this incredible, staging and grading opportunity. And so now the dialogue, instead of Mr. Jones, you have mild periodontitis, the conversation is, Mr. Jones, you have stage 1 periodontitis. Now, what does that sound like to you?
Well, it reminds me of cancer.
Right. Cancer. Well, you know, we stage a lot of chronic diseases, hypertension, we stage, right? So it absolutely, most patients, when I say that, and I tell every single one of my patients, you have stage, whatever, periodontitis. And then I'm quiet and I let them ask any questions. The thing is, when patients affiliate perio with cancer, and I don't mean to say that perio is as serious as, receiving a cancer diagnosis, but what I mean to say is, when we stage chronic disease, we're helping our patients to understand many things. Number one, we see patients in a perceived state of health. Most of the patients that sit down in most general practices, I'll say I work in a perio office, so by the time the patient sees me, they know they have a problem. But most patients, when they sit down in a dental office, they want their free cleaning, the cleaning that their insurance covers, right? They want their prophy. They want that buff and shine and send me out the door. Very rarely do patients say, I've been bleeding in this area. I think I have active periodontitis, and I think I need SRPs in this quadrant. I mean, it'd be amazing if we had an educated community in that, right? The other layer to it is, perio doesn't typically hurt. It's a chronic disease. And so the challenge, I think, for us for a long time in dentistry has been that we are struggling to convince a patient that they have a disease process that they don't think they have. Right? So we're trying to explain to them that they have this infection, and they're saying, well, if I have this infection, why doesn't it hurt? And then we get into that uncomfortable, we're taking communications courses to help our patients understand that. Right. And the reality becomes, and I used to always say this, Michelle, I used to say, I wish that those prostaglandins worked harder, right? Because the prostaglandins are the entities that cause pain in an inflammatory or an infection process. I wish that those prostaglandins actually went to work and did what they were supposed to do. Because can you imagine if perio actually hurt? Like, how many Uber rides have you been in, and you smell your Uber driver and you're like, dude, you need to get a dental cleaning, you need to get some work done. But it doesn't bother them. It doesn't hurt them. And I mean, even in perio, these patients come in and they're like, oh yeah, this tooth is wiggly. It's like,
yes. Or you see it as they breathe.
Yeah, it's like flapping in the wind, It's like, and that doesn't hurt. It's incredible, right?
It is incredible.
This process should hurt, and it doesn't. So
it's incredible to see that it hurts so little, but also hurts so much. Like,
correct.
The spectrum or the spectrum is
right,
wide and long and big. I don't know what way I want to say that, but the pendulum swing is pretty large on that one.
Correct. Between male and female patients mostly. No, I'm kidding. But the reality becomes, I think we've been trying to convince patients of this. And so when we move patients into staging and they do equate this to cancer, they understand that there are many layers to this. Number one, there can be a relatively asymptomatic, I'm putting that in quotes because the term asymptomatic now means so many different things for us.
Yeah.
But there's an asymptomatic quality to this, right? That patients can have perio, but they don't necessarily experience those signs and symptoms until we're later on in the stages. Also, and this is one communication piece that I really want to drive home for hygienists. It is good news if we can catch it in the early stages, because when we catch it in the early stages, we can treat it. The challenge becomes when we continue to let it, we get on the hamster wheel. Why don't you floss better? Can you floss your way out of an irreversible disease? I don't know. I haven't read that anywhere, but we tell patients that all the time, right? The crazy stuff that the crazy things we say, just try better. We don't disclose them. We don't show them where the plaque is.
I just don't understand
samplers.
when we gave floss the magic powers that it
Right.
It's
Isn't that amazing? I know. Floss should be more expensive if it's really that magical and it can do the work that we do.
100%.
That's amazing.
Why
even go to hygiene
the
school
rate of Botox.
You can just floss your to 100%. I know. So I am an advocate of, obviously I floss. I'm an avid flosser, but the reality is that when patients have this type of an infection, we need to stop that dialogue. Let's just have you floss better. Can you just get your brush back there a little bit better? Change out your brush head and let's try that. Yes, home care is huge. It's important. But by the time the patient has an irreversible disease, that's the idea. They have an irreversible disease. And we're sending them mixed signals by telling them to do better and letting them know that if they do better, it could reverse what's happening in their mouth. That's not the case. If it was an inflammatory condition, maybe. But if it's irreversible, we just can't. So that's one layer to it. I think the other piece to it as well is that it helps us from a clinical decision-making standpoint. So let's get to the meat of what we know about the stages and grades. First of all, patients are going to be classified as either periodontal health, gingival disease, or periodontitis. Okay. Now, in the periodontal health category, there are actually two different categories of periodontal health. And this is before we even move into the stages. Okay. The patient is only staged if they have active perio. So periodontal health, we have two different flavors. We have your typical periodontal health. When I was faculty, my students used to call these patients unicorns because, seriously, how many patients are like legit healthy, Also, the AAP did coin this term incipient gingivitis, and that's an individual where less than 10% of the mouth is bleeding or has inflammation. And so they're considered a periodontal health with incipient gingivitis. Okay.
I would also call those unicorns.
I would call those unicorns as well. Again, this is literally nobody fits. I've met one patient ever that had no calculus and had impeccable. And honestly, for that patient, I said to her, I'm like, you don't need to come every 6 months. I know that's shocking and people are probably if you're driving to work, don't get in a car accident, but patients that are legit healthy and they've controlled their risk factors, they don't need to come in every 6 months, right? Just be mindful of that. So then the next step in that is stable or periodontal health on a reduced periodontium. And this is really important because patients can be considered stable where there is bone loss or recession that we have noted. Okay. And so these are patients that are considered stable on a reduced periodontium. We can have two different types of stable on a reduced periodontium. The first is a periodontitis patient. So for example, Michelle, this would be a patient that you've seen, they have active perio, you've done SRPs on that patient. The patient comes back, they're impeccable. They, of course, now have some early bone loss from that history of perio, maybe some recession, but otherwise they are, all stable perio pockets. We're not seeing, any gingival inflammation at all. These are your favorite perio maintenance patients that come in, right? They come in every 3 months, coral pink recession, but coral pink gingiva. They are considered patients that are, quote, in remission. So that's called stable on a reduced periodontium. Those are your perio patients. We also have non-periodontitis patients. Those are patients, for example, that had clinical crown lengthening done, where you may see some recession, but that was done by a surgeon or a periodontal specialist, if that makes sense. A relatively rare group, but we did want to categorize that as well. I also want to not to be super confusing, but they've also classified gingivitis on a reduced periodontium. There's a lot of confusion about that right now, so I don't want to get too much into it. But essentially, these are cases where the patient has a reduced periodontium, bone loss, or recession. And while the pocket depths are, generalized 1 to 3 millimeters, the patient has visualized, inflammation or bleeding tendency associated with that, if that makes sense. So that's considered gingivitis on a reduced periodontium.
Is the confusion because normally we would say they are no longer in remission, or is the confusion because we don't know if that reduced periodontium is due to previous disease or just anatomical issues.
Correct. Yeah. So here's the challenge. New patient to your practice sits down. They've got recession. You probe them, generalized 1 to 3 millimeters, bleeding. There is gingivitis, but there's recession there too. That is considered gingivitis on a reduced periodontium, for that particular patient. So then the challenge becomes they've got a reduced periodontium. Is that a prophy patient? Technically,
especially when it's localized.
Right. So the challenge becomes technically they have a reduced periodontium and, perio maintenance, this is the challenge that we run into. Perio maintenance is for a patient who has been through active periodontal therapy. So when we're asking a patient if they've had active periotherapy, we're asking them for their history, right? I think patients are terrible historians. Have you ever asked a diabetic patient what their A1C is? They don't know. They have no idea. We ask patients about, when did you have that root canal done? I don't know, like 5 years ago, 25 years ago. I have no idea. Oh, I was living in Chicago at the time. So that must have been, they have no idea. So we're 100%. Taking the patient's history for it. And the other more provocative layer that we can talk about at another time is, in my opinion, I think a lot of patients are receiving SRPs, but hygienists have been coding it as a prophy.
Oh, yes.
So,
yes.
These patients have over time experienced more attachment loss because we've just been prophying them. Why is it if we're doing all of these prophies, if you take a look, the ADA has a research study on it. It's like 87% of adults across the United States receive a prophy. Okay, well, if you look at the actual prevalence of periodontal disease, it's like 1 in 2 adults across the United States. So how is it that we're doing 87% of these individuals are receiving a prophy, but yet half of them are perio?
Because only unicorns go to the dentist.
Because only unicorns, And then, of course, the challenge becomes, and I ask hygienists, I'm like, are you exhausted? Like, your shoulders hurt, your back hurts, your hand hurts. Half of us are leaving hygiene and going into like real estate. Like, why is that, right? It's because I think these hygienists that say all the time, like, Katrina, I don't have that much time with my patient. We've tried to rebrand ourselves, but we're still, at the end of the day, I think stepping, back into this same rigmarole of being the cleaning lady. Like, we need to stop being focused on trying to like hurry up and scale everything. If there's more debris than we can manage in that small chunk of time that we have to actually scale, let's appropriately diagnose that case, shall we? Let's take that time instead to look down the patient's airway and evaluate their Mallampati classification and talk to them about obstructive disorders. Because I'll tell you, if that patient is functioning on diminished oxygen levels, you're going to be a far more effective clinician to counsel them and educate them on that than you will be spending all this time trying to desperately prophy up this patient who has active periodontal infection. Or what about the fact that 85% of people who go into a routine dental office do not receive an oral cancer screening head and neck examination during the routine visits. So we're missing the mark in so many ways as preventive specialists.
No.
There's so many other areas that we need to be looking. We need to start at the top. We need to take the steps that we need to take to get there. And if you get to the final 20 minutes of your appointment and you're looking at all this debris that's there and you can't effectively remove it, let's take a look at our diagnostics and see if there's maybe a way that we should be looking a bit differently at that. And that's what this staging and grading has done. See, I'm going off on all these tangents.
No, they are ones that really make sense. And I think are hopefully going to empower people. And quite honestly, we just can't even get the data to say like what's actually happening because nobody's calling a spade a spade.
Right.
And we all know this. We let insurance dictate us. We bow down to them. We let the patients kind of bully us if their insurance isn't going to pay for it. And this has been a long-standing issue in our profession. And not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but if we don't ask our patients, like, you need to have a call with your insurance company.
Yeah.
If this is a problem, like, this is what you have. If you had cancer, you wouldn't be like, hey, can I just get what my insurance pays for?
Can you just remove the one part of the cancer lump on my lung, but not the others?
100%.
Yeah.
I was in the hospital. I think everybody knows that, like, a year ago with some major surgery. And I can't imagine just being like, can you fix just like whatever my insurance company would fix? That'd be real great. And I'll just put up But we don't have that conversation with our patients. We don't have set it up for, I guess, to win and collect proper data, because the insurance company's going to be like, well, you've always been doing a prophy.
Right. Absolutely. And the right to say that. They're right.
They absolutely are.
Because of what, because of our data and all of those challenges. And I totally agree. One of my favorite studies that I bring up is a study that Aura Pharma did, actually. 300 participants in this study, and all 300 of those participants were very similar in the same way, in that they were patients of a dental practice somewhere in the United States. This was spread out across the United States. All 300 of these patients were patients of dental practices where they received a treatment plan for 4 quads of SRP with local delivery of antibiotic into any 6+ millimeter pocket that was present. And all 300 of these patients declined the treatment plan. And so Aura Pharma wanted to know, why did you decline that treatment plan? Were you didn't have the time to do it? You were scared of the needle. You were afraid of the pain. You didn't understand your treatment plan. And so I deliver this in a room full of dental professionals, right? And they, like a moth to the flame, they all fall into it. And I'll say, what do you think is the number one reason why the patients decline the treatment? And every time they're like, the money, the insurance, blah, 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 right? And I go click. And the first, the number one answer, the most popular answer was, the patient did not trust their dental healthcare professional.
Ooh, what a punch to the gut.
It is a punch to the gut, but I hate to say it. Why is it that they don't trust us? It's because you and I get on these podcasts and we say it. Like, let's look at the statistics. Let's look at the prevalence. Let's look at what we know about, periodontal disease. How many of us, the patient, we have them for an hour, they show up 14 minutes and 52 seconds late. So it's not quite 15 minutes late. So we can still see them for their hygiene appointment. And now we have to do in 45 minutes what we would typically have an hour to do. And so we do that cursory, just trying to get through it. We got to finish that prophy. We got to get that prophy done because, God forbid we tell the doctor, we don't have time today to complete that prophylaxis on that patient. Then we can't bill the patient for the prophy for that hour. And, those are the challenges that unfortunately we think patients don't see through, but by the way, they see through it. And I'm a huge believer of, if you do the right thing, the production will always follow. If you are there and you are spending the time educating the patient on it within reason, the production will always follow. I've stepped into offices where, doctors will say, you don't understand my patients. My patients are very different. They, question everything I say and blah, 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 blah. It's like the patient, there's one thing in common here. Why is it that they're struggling to trust you? And so, I go back to basics with those patients. I walk them through that process of care. And I do share, I'm very fortunate in that when I treat patients at our periodontal practice, we walk through, every step of periodontal probing, bleeding tendency. I then go back through and do recessions, furcation, mobility. I do TMJ evaluation, extraoral, intraoral, malimpetti, airway obstruction, feel their thyroid. I take vital signs, blood pressure, pulse ox. I sit the patient up. We take, any PAs, bite wings, intraoral, extraoral images. By the time I sit down and I talk to that patient, you think that patient's going to question what I know about what's going on in their mouth? The sad reality is 9 times out of 10, you know what that patient says to me? That is the most thorough exam I have ever received in my life. And to me, that's where I think we're missing the mark. We're missing that opportunity. And maybe that's why patients don't trust us. The second and third most popular answers in that survey I was telling you about, the patients didn't understand the consequences of not undergoing treatment. The patients didn't understand, the risks and benefits associated with acquiring that treatment. Cost ranked 5th in that study. So it's important for us to know that, yes, patients are concerned with insurance, they're concerned with finances, but we all joke. Those are the same patients that are putting their Louis Vuitton bag in the corner, putting their BMW keys in their Louis Vuitton bag, and, sitting there. They don't want to wear the protective eyewear because, their eyelashes just got done. And so they have the funds. It's a value problem. And that goes back to the work that we need to do.
Oh, so good. I want to make sure I understand. So tell me again what classification we're in right now.
Okay. So, we haven't even gotten into the, okay. So we've done periodontal health. And then we have after periodontal health, which is perio health, and then stable on that reduced periodontia. Okay. All right. You can also have gingivitis on that reduced periodontia.
Get it. Here we are.
Then you also have gingivitis, and gingivitis can be non-biofilm induced. or biofilm induced, more commonly biofilm induced. And so you've got those two different flavors, and the more descriptive that you can be, there are going to be contributory factors, pregnancy gingivitis, for example, puberty gingivitis or adolescent, gingivitis, ortho-induced gingivitis. That helps to color a picture about what the etiology is of that gingival disease. So then from there, we move on to periodontitis. And periodontitis, we are going to be talking about the stages with that. If the patient has active perio, they will receive a stage and a grade. Now, with perio, we have our, plain old perio, but we do still also have the necrotizing periodontal diseases. So that would be necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis and necrotizing ulcerative periodontitis. And we also have periodontitis as a manifestation of systemic disease. So those are that's the triad of periodontitis: necrotizing, plain perio, and then periodontitis as a manifestation of systemic disease.
Got it.
Okay? Now, perio as a manifestation of systemic disease is interesting because a lot of people were categorizing diabetic patients, stroke patients, cardiovascular patients into that category. That is not the appropriate category for these cases. The AAP has identified those types of systemic diseases that fit into that category, and they're relatively obscure diseases like Papillon-Lefebvre and Shidakagashi trisomy 21. Those are diseases where if the patient has the disease, there's typically some type of a neutrophil challenge with that particular patient. So we are absolutely going to see periodontal attachment loss in those cases, okay? Now, for our stroke, diabetic, cardiovascular cases, those are patients that are plain Jane periodontitis, but the AAP has also identified that there are other conditions that can affect the periodontium, and that would be systemic diseases or conditions affecting the periodontal supporting tissues. Okay, so that would be the category that goes into. There are other conditions in that area like periodontal abscesses or perioendo abscess lesions. We also have mucogingival deformities and conditions, abhorrent frental pulls, patients that have thin tissue biotype, for example, which we're starting to look at a little bit more, traumatic occlusal forces. So primary, secondary occlusal trauma, that's, also considered a condition affecting the periodontium. And then tooth and prosthesis related factors. These would be teeth, for example, that have cemental tears, an enamel pearl, deep palatal lingual groove on your maxillary lateral incisors, or prosthesis related. So, they're wearing a prosthetic device and, we're seeing some attachment
bulky
loss.
crown.
There you go. Bulky crowns.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. Those
buried to subgingival.
You got it. Our favorite things to clean around, right? So those are all conditions that affect the periodontium, and then we'll go into the stages from there. But I also did want to point out, and I know that you've done programs on this, but also dental implants have been in the mouth long enough that they can also get disease around them, and so they've also finally classified that. And so we
actually have a classification for a healthy implant.
Peri-implant health. Isn't that amazing? But it's important for us to be able to identify that. A lot of us, when implants got placed, we were afraid to probe them. We were afraid to assess them. We need to be assessing these implants because if we can see them in the inflammatory process, peri-implant mucositis, we can go ahead and, address that before it becomes peri-implantitis, which is the periodontal disease version around a periodontal implant. Okay.
So good. So, all right, let me make sure I'm here. All right. So we have kind of the rare babies of true systemic causes of perio. And then we have our necrotizing category. And then we're going to have probably the if we're looking at the bell curve, right? This is the big chunk of it.
The one standard deviation. No, I'm kidding. Let's not. No standard deviations today.
Don't make my brain hurt.
I know. Oh gosh. Yes.
We're looking at the chunk of it, right?
Correct.
Like this is probably most of the people that we're playing with, right?
Correct. Yeah. Most of we've run into one or two maybe necrotizing cases, most of us in our careers, and you remember those cases forward and backward. And yes, the, perio as a manifestation of systemic disease, again, those are going to be relatively obscure diseases. So the bulk of your patient clientele who have active periodontal disease will likely fall into the chronic periodontitis category, and they will be staged from there. But again, know
Okay.
that you can have, other, contributory factors. So the patient could have chronic perio and then have a perioendo lesion on number 18, right? So then you could utilize that as a localized descriptive term. Okay, for that particular patient. And what that does is that helps to be descriptive about, the patient has active perio, so I decision to do SRPs, but this perioendo lesion we did a referral for, that we acknowledge that SRP is not going to, stabilize, the disease process around that perioendo lesion. So from there, if the patient has active perio, they fall into either stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, or stage 4 periodontitis. Again, if they are in remission or they are, we're not seeing that activity, they are considered stable on a reduced periodontia. Stage 1, this is considered that borderline between gingivitis and periodontitis. Okay, so these are patients, I want you to picture in your head what a healthy periodontium looks like. And with a healthy periodontium, we know that the CEJ is where we get that beautiful attachment of those crestal fibers. We have a little biologic width around the collar of the crown of the tooth, and we allow anywhere between 1 to 3 millimeters as an appropriate biologic width. And as long as that puppy's not bleeding, we're good to go. Okay. The bone level is about 2 millimeters from where that CEJ is, kind of just an approximation. So that's when we're looking at a healthy periodontium. So if we probe that patient and we get a 4 millimeter pocket, and that 4 millimeter pocket is a true 4 millimeter pocket. And what I mean by that is not pseudo pocketing or overgrowth, but rather we are sliding down, we are sliding through the first, 1 to 3 allowed biologic width or collar around the crown of the tooth. And then we're sliding 1 millimeter past that CEJ to bump into the floor of that sulcus there. Okay. That's where we're seeing the earliest signs or the earliest stages of attachment loss. And that's what we are now considering stage 1 periodontitis. So borderline between gingivitis and periodontitis, your greatest pocket depth in the mouth will be a 4 millimeter probing depth. And that is a true probing depth. Again, not pseudo-pocketing, hyperplastic, but a true probing depth. You're also going to see in the severity section, if you look at a chart, it'll say interdental clinical attachment loss of 1 to 2 millimeters. Again, that's just kind of noting that the first 1 to 2 millimeters of those crestal fibers are broken from that CEJ. It's important to note in this category, the patient is experiencing less than 15% radiologic bone loss.
Okay.
Stay tuned because we're going to talk more about bone loss in a moment. Moving on into stage 2, the AAP is termed this established periodontitis. They also remind the clinician that this is the opportunity to, definitely begin instituting some type of a professional management, bacterial removal, and subsequent monitoring of the disease process. In this particular patient, your greatest probing depth will be 5 millimeters. And again, this is going to be a true probing depth, not due to hyperplasia. The interdental clinical attachment loss, anywhere between 3 to 4 millimeters. So again, we are probing past that cemento enamel junction. And in this case, the radiologic bone loss is anywhere between 15 to 33%. That's really important because those of us who are traveling and speaking on the AAP staging and grading, we tell people when they get our course handout to draw a line between stage 2 and stage 3. The reason for that is Cheryl Westfall out of NYU did a research study to identify how much bone loss needs to be demineralized clinically in order for us to see it radiologically.
Oh.
And what she found was that by the time we can see apical migration, radiologic bone loss on an x-ray, that particular patient has experienced anywhere between 30 to 50% bone loss.
Ooh. And are we talking like from the CEJ, or are we talking the peaks?
From the peaks.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
From the peaks. Yeah. So what's interesting about that, and it makes sense, but we're taking a 2-dimensional image of a 3-dimensional object. And so the challenge, of course, becomes we need to be mindful of the fact that we are missing that interproximal area. Oftentimes in these earlier stages of bone loss, 15% or less, or 15% to 33%, which we see in stage 2, that the buccal and lingual plates of that the buccolingual cortical plates rather obliterate the ability for us to be able to see that interdental space.
For sure. Yeah.
Those of us who can take a cone beam, a 3D CBCT, we can move that image around and see that scoop of bone. But it truly takes 30 to 50% demineralization to see that drop in bone. And many of us were trained that if you want to identify if the patient has bone loss, you pull up the x-rays, right? That's been the challenge.
So if that's the case and we're calling it 30%, I mean, how does that affect our staging here?
What that means for our staging component is that radiographs are not going to be our best tool to identify the earliest stages of periodontitis. Our clinical assessments are. So we have to stop the whole, how was your trip to Rome, 323, 323, because we're missing the opportunity to identify perio in its earliest stages.
You also can't label bleeding and get that. Is it above 10%? Is it below 10%? Unless you're labeling it bleeding.
Correct. So the important layer to this is, and the reason why we draw that line in the sand between stage 2 and stage 3 is, by the time you can see radiologic bone loss, the patient is in stage 3.
Oof.
Isn't that incredible? We can't sit back and wait. We can't sit back and watch for this bone loss to occur. And so then the question comes up over and over and over again. But Katrina, if I don't show that there's attachment loss and bone loss, how can I bill this to insurance? Well, there are other ways to demonstrate attachment loss, and that goes back to your periodontal charting. We need to be including, we know, for example, on number 19, if you're getting a straight number 19 3mm reading, it's highly likely that you're also approximating into the earliest stage of a class 1 furcation because of what we know about the proximity from the CEJ, into that particular furcation. So we have to be mindful of that. And so often we're missing the mark on it. I just found a research study the other day that did a huge chart audit in North Carolina, huge, like thousands upon thousands of charts. And this research study was incredible because it actually stated of these patient charts, they pulled patients that came in on a routine basis every 3, 4, or 6 months into the office. Of those patient charts, only 20% of those individuals had routine periodontal charting done annually. Even within that charting, isn't this insane? I know, it's like,
start
why?
charting, please.
Even within that, of those perio charts, only 16% of those perio charts had bleeding points marked in them.
No.
Let alone, if they're not
It
even
hurts
marking,
my little
who's putting
perio heart.
furcations in their recession? It's like, this is what's crazy.
Ugh.
And I get it. We don't have time and it's hard. And if you don't have an assistant or you don't have the technology, that is very difficult. It's very challenging. The reality becomes we're missing it. How much disease, how much infection is walking out of your doors because you're not pulling that data, because you're not pulling the information. So that is our opportunity, I think, for us to take a look at it and to be mindful of the fact that the best way for us to establish if the patient is in stage 1 or stage 2 is to go to our periodontal charting. That's where we're going to gather that information. Moving on to stage 3. Patients in stage 3 now are experiencing radiologic bone loss extending into the middle third of the root and beyond. These particular patients are going to experience a probing depth maximum 6 millimeters. They could also have vertical bone loss, so we could see those defects radiologically. They could now begin to experience advanced furcations, class 2 and class 3 furcations, and can also demonstrate moderate ridge defects, which can be a bit difficult to see from a non-surgical standpoint. As you and I both know, once you see that patient flapped back, that's where you can see those moderate ridge defects, from a subclinical standpoint. But that's where we begin to see, as the AAP has characterized it, this infection is now, a deeper lesion that has now extended into that middle portion of the root or beyond. And the major identifier between stage 3 and stage 4 is that in stage 4, the patient has lost or will lose 5 or more teeth due to periodontal disease, in addition to advanced pocketing beyond 6 millimeters. Okay. The major thing to know about stage 4 classifications or staging the patient in a stage 4 situation is that these are patients that, because they are missing and or will be missing so many teeth due to periodontitis, these are patients that may need complex rehabilitation. These are patients that may, because maybe single rooted teeth are performing the function of multi-rooted teeth that have been extracted. Maybe there's mesial drifting, tipping, super eruption, all of these challenges. Now we're running into additional periodontal challenges, and the patient now needs to go through rehab. That could be either wearing a partial or a full denture, implant supported dentures, dental implants in those areas, but now they need advanced rehabilitation to address the amount of destruction that's happening in their mouth.
So I do have just a quick question about that, because the have or will lose 5+. Is that because they're sitting in your chair and the treatment plan is about to be extracting 5+?
Exactly. Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah. So when they come into our practice at AZPerio, we'll go through and we will identify prognosis for each, for the teeth. And if it's, hopeless or poor prognosis and we are recommending extraction, that particular tooth is going to add to, the kitty or the pot of all the teeth that are considered have or will be extracted due to perio.
And then the other question that always popped in my mind when this happened is, with our patients that have okay memories, how do we know the extraction was because of perio? Or, I think they'll remember trauma, but decay, perio, and also are we counting third molars for extractions?
Yeah, so fabulous question. The challenge becomes, I think right now we're still learning a lot about how to employ the AAP staging and grading. And so from a wisdom tooth standpoint, unless the patient, had all of their wisdom teeth in and they received a major perio abscess around number 17. So number 17 had to be extracted. And now number 16 is super erupting in. Now we start to consider that as a true tooth in the periodontium. But a patient who had their wisdom teeth extracted, and this is why it's important to gather patient history, is it not? For the patient to say, when I was 18, I went through braces and then I got my wisdom teeth out and then I didn't wear my retainer. So then I went through Invisalign, which like every millennial is going through that right now, right? So, that, adds another layer to it. You're right. Patients are terrible historians. And so, we do the best that we can in understanding that. More often than not, if the patient has lost their teeth due to periodontal disease, and you ask them about it, they will say something like, yeah, it was getting wiggly, or I had pyorrhea, or I was, I saw a periodontal specialist back in Milwaukee. Usually they say something along those lines to kind of help color that picture for you. But you're right, that is another layer or another challenge to it. Ultimately, if you see that the patient has, for example, had their, first molars out for a long time and we're seeing mesial drifting and tipping, and so they need major rehabilitation, which could mean orthodontia, placement of dental implants and things like that, that is considered a stage 4 case.
Anyway, because they're going to need it.
Because they need that rehabilitation.
So it's splitting hairs how those teeth were lost.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that gives us essentially a quick over the balcony view of the stages of periodontal disease. And the goal, of course, is to put the patient into remission, get them into a stable on a reduced periodontium situation. But of course, if the patient is unstable in a reduced periodontium, and then we begin to see a reactivity of the disease process, then we begin to stage them accordingly. In addition, we now are utilizing grading. So you had mentioned earlier on in the segment, aggressive perio. And aggressive perio, of course, is the, conversation that we had around patients that had rapid rate episodic bone loss, that for whatever reason, based on, their age or whatever was going on, that they had this, just aggressive amounts of bone loss. And we believed that it was due to a high level of Agrigentibacter actinomycetum comitans. We thought that was the bug that was associated with this type of perio. So that's why we had classified patients as aggressive perio. The AAP re-looked at that and actually said there's no unique pathophysiology, which is just a fancy term for, they can't necessarily say that aggressive cases have higher levels of AA, but rather there are, cascades of risk factors that are elevating the patient into, the potential for these, high level episodic progressive diseases. And so now, every patient who has active stage 1, 2, 3, or 4 perio will also receive a grade of perio. Grade A is slow rate, grade B, moderate rate, and grade C is rapid rate. And there are a lot of ways that we can determine that. The ideal is to have direct evidence. And what I mean by that is having a series of radiographs over 5 or more years and the patient's perio charting to be able to identify if the patient has had no loss of any, attachment. That would put them in a grade A category. Grade B would be if they've had less than 2 millimeters of clinical attachment loss over those 5 years. And then grade C rapid rate is when we see 2 or more, millimeters of attachment loss over 5 years. Sometimes we can use direct evidence. If the patient's a new patient to the practice or if they've been hopping between offices, we can't do that. And so then we utilize things like indirect evidence. And there are 2 ways that we employ indirect evidence. The first is the percentage of bone loss over age. And what I mean by that is we actually create a ratio depending on how much bone loss we're seeing on the x-ray and how that relates to the patient's age. For example, let's say that we have a 60-year-old and that 60-year-old has 30% bone loss. Well, when we divide that out, that puts them at a 0.5 grade B moderate case. But if we had, for example, a 30-year-old who has 30% bone loss, when we divide that out is 1.0, and that puts them into a grade C rapid rate. There's a nice little dialogue or a little table that the AAP has provided to us to help kind of reflect that. The major idea is, even kind of going down, the pipe a little bit more. You have a 15-year-old who has 30% bone loss. It starts to get more and more concerning the younger they are and the more bone loss they have. And so that's another way that we can use that diagram or that identifier to help fill in the blanks for us with regards to grading the patient. And we also look at case phenotype. So if the patient, we see these patients all the time, they come in, they've got heavy debris everywhere, gross, debris, I don't mean gross, but like gross, everywhere. And they come in and we debride everything and everything looks amazing underneath. And you're like, wow, you tell them you hit the genetic jackpot, like good for you. Like you have so much debris, like you should have so much more disease and you don't, like you really physiologically, like whatever's going on in your body, like good for you, right? That's a grade A or a slow rate. Grade B, moderate rate, that's a patient whose amount of attachment loss is commensurate with the amount of debris that they have in their mouth. Those are patients that come in with the perfect triangles of calculus. They've got some bone loss, but it makes sense because you're seeing those perfect, triangles of calc. Grade C, rapid rate, which you and I have both seen in perio quite a bit, is actually in my opinion, one of the most tragic of cases. And those are patients that are actually incredibly meticulous with their home care. And yet they come in and they continue to have disease. It's hard because, how do you continue to motivate those patients? They're working so hard, but that they're considered those rapid rate cases. And then we also have grade modifiers. Currently, the AAP has identified 2 types of risk factors, the first being smoking habit, the second being diabetic status. So if the patient's a non-smoker, they're considered a grade A. The patient is a tobacco user, less than 10 cigarettes a day, they're considered a grade B. More than 10 cigarettes a day, grade C rapid rate. A diabetic patient who has a hemoglobin A1C over 7 is considered a rapid rate. A controlled diabetic under 7%, that would be a grade B. And then a non-diabetic patient, that would be considered a grade A. So you want to use whichever grade modifier would move them into, whatever advanced stage. And what I mean by that is, let's say you've got a patient who's had no radiologic bone loss over the past 5 years. They have heavy biofilm, low destruction. They're a non-smoker, but they're diabetic. And their diabetic, status is uncontrolled. Their hemoglobin A1C is at 9%. Because of that 9%, that elevates them into that grade C rapid rate. But let's say, they started, instituting diet and exercise. They control their hemoglobin A1C. They come back in and they're proud to say that their diabetic status, they're now at a 6.5%. That patient has moved themselves down to that grade B moderate category. So patients can ebb and flow and move around. And again, when we take a look at that terminology and the opportunity to say things like, Mr. Jones, you have stage 2 periodontal disease, we also need to employ the grade. And a lot of people focus on the staging and miss the opportunity to focus on the grade. The grade for me is the why. Have you read that book, Sign and Signage, Start with Why?
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's the why. Patients need to know the why. We get these questions all the time. So did I not have this disease last time? How come all of a sudden now you're identifying this infection, right? They need to know the why. We have for so long just been looking at the pocket and it's bleeding. And we're like, I don't know, it's bleeding. You have stage whatever perio. Instead of having a dialogue with the patient, where now we're saying, Mr. Jones, you have these risk factors. Did you know that because you have a family history of, cancer, that could elevate your risk for other chronic diseases? Did you know, Mr. Jones, that because of your diabetic status, it's going to make it difficult for us to control your gum tissue challenges? Did you know, Mr. Jones, that because of your nutritional status, the stress, the way that you're clenching and grinding, we need to be pulling these risk factors need to be the heaviest part of our dialogue, in my opinion. And it's been a beautiful way for me to feel confident when I'm talking to patients about the activity of the disease process, because then the challenge now doesn't become, how do I convince them that they have this? I've been so patient-centered this entire time, unpacking this dialogue for them and helping them understand from a very unique, very individualized standpoint why it is that this disease process is occurring for them. And ultimately, is that not what we need to be doing for our patients when we're looking at their health history, when we're gathering these periodontal assessments, and then when we sit them up and we educate them? We need to stop, going over like all this bacteria. And here's, we do this thing with like the sleeve, like this is your gums and this, and then you pull it down above. They have no clue what we're talking about. Tell them things that are real to them. Tell them things that make sense to them. And can link back to the consequences that are so real for them. That's where you build that true value in the work that we do as clinicians. And that's where you're going to get your optimized case acceptance for patients.
Ugh, so true.
It is.
So as far as the grades, so you can fluctuate in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But can you fluctuate in your stages? I understand, like if you go back to reduced periodontium health kind of thing, but can you fluctuate in that stage 2, 3, 4?
No. The challenge becomes this. Most clinicians, when they take this chart and they use it to help stage their patient, most clinicians use the pocket depths only.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll say like, oh, their 5s went down to 4s. So they were stage 2.
But we got that bone loss over here in that category.
Right.
Yes.
And the reality is you have to look at the fact that there's clinical attachment loss. And the reality is, who has the time to probe and then feel with that probe, like, okay, there's the CEJ. Okay. And then how many more millimeters am I going to get? Who has the time for that? Right. So the reality becomes, unfortunately, while we can see healing via long junctional epithelial fibers, the bone loss is the bone loss. And the challenge becomes, from an ebb and a flow standpoint, the stage is there. They can move from stage into stable on a reduced periodontium. And from a stage 4, the need for rehabilitation, and then they have been rehabilitated, and now they move into stable on a reduced periodontium. All of those layers can happen. But to my knowledge, and based on the information we're seeing from the AAP, we're not seeing that patients can move down into the stages. They can always move up, but can't move down.
Move down. And does it get a little trickier if we are doing surgical procedures with like biologic material like Embarking or Gym 21 or something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Any time that, because we always say, this is irreversible. There's no, I can't grow bone back. We always say that I can't grow bone back. But we can. Yeah. AmnioSpark, Gem 21, any of those guys, of course, when we put in growth factors like that, we can see, buildup of bone back. And so that would be an opportunity for us to, again, look at the history of the patient and state that patient is stable on a reduced periodontium, history of, periodontal surgical site in this area. And again, although that patient may look like they've got nice bone now, that is a periodontal maintenance case. That's a patient that has been through periodontal surgery and needs to be maintained, because we know that their risk of, moving back into the active disease process is relatively high.
I feel like a little elephant in the room is how we are calibrated to probe, because 1 millimeter difference between these stages, that's not a lot. And granted, you're right. We need to look at the bone levels as well. But if we are looking just at that 1 millimeter, you could get 6, I could get 5. Like, What do we do about that?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. You were faculty, you taught for a while. I was faculty, and calibration, is that not like the biggest challenge whenever you're talking about like, like just getting us all on the same page? And so you're absolutely right. I think, there are a lot of really great hands-on programs, and, I don't mean to say that we should make it a requirement for licensure, because I that may be a bit far, but I would really like to see more focus in continuing education on calibrating dental professionals. Even as a consultant, I go into dental practices and the doctor and the hygienist aren't even calibrated on how to diagnose perio. So if you got two individuals who are working side by side, day in and day out, and they're not calibrated, how are we as a community going to be able to be calibrated? There's been a lot of dialogue about, whether we should have standardized testing for dental hygiene students in order to pass their, boards exams and to be able to get licensure. And even within that, regionally, some boards exams are requiring hygiene students to probe and some aren't. And there's a lot of calibration there. And what I mean by even bringing that up is that there are tools that are there, measurement tools that educators have developed, that these testing sites have developed to calibrate. It would be really great, I think, if we as a community could take a look at what those tools are and utilizing those as opportunities to calibrate. Some of us are lighter probers. Some of us are more aggressive probers. Some of us overangulate. Some of us have different probes in different kits. So if we get a UNC in one kit and then the marquee in another kit, that can be very confusing as well. Some of us don't even have the black markings on our probes anymore because they've been overprocessed so many times. So it's like there's 100%. I think that is not only the elephant in the room, but a very provocative but true statement that in dentistry in general, we're not calibrated. A patient can get one treatment plan, one level of excellence in one practice, and then go across the street to another practice and get a completely different type of treatment plan and a completely different standard of excellence. And so, this again, I think is another opportunity. This whole stay at home, everybody doing CE, everybody kind of coming out of this, reevaluating, reassessing where it is that we go from here, rebranding. Now's the time for us as a community, I think, to come together and to have a unified dialogue about how we're going to do better for our patients, not do better for the production of the practice, but in my opinion, doing better for the patient, the production will always follow. And that I think is where we need to be looking. And thought leaders out there have been saying that for a long time, but I agree. I think as long as we are calibrated within our practices, and I implore you to even consider talking to your periodontal specialist, hygienists out there who, heavily refer to a periodontal specialist. Ask them if you can observe in their office, ask them if they can over the shoulder observe you or have one of their hygienists over the shoulder observe you for calibration purposes, because to be able to calibrate with your periodontal specialist, I think is really the key. And so, some great opportunities, I think.
I 100% agree. And my pushback on this is not in it. I think that should be the level at which we practice. But don't you feel like there is a cloth of shame if you dare graduate with a degree and have to ask for help afterwards?
Oh my gosh, 100%. 100%.
And that is I think that's the real problem in our profession.
Totally. It's almost like we're embarrassed, right? It's almost like we're embarrassed that the patient is going to be judging us. Like she doesn't know what she's doing because she needed to get somebody
our
to help
employer
her. Or
our fellow hygienists in the practice.
Absolutely. And I will say, my doctors are so awesome about this. Have I been in a surgical procedure and I'm struggling to get that calculus out? Yeah. I work alongside 10 diplomats to the American Board of Periodontology. So I have one of two options. I can continue sweating it out, sharpening my instruments, cranking up the power on, my mechanized scaler, having the patient now concerned because I'm like really sweating it in one area. I could leave it and then, risk having a diplomat see that. Or I could just say, hey, doc, you know what? I'm really struggling to reach this area. Do you mind just taking a look and seeing if you can approach that? Again, you're right. I think it's an ego thing. We need to lower our little dog syndrome, our need to constantly show like, I know what I'm doing. I say, I do that all the time. my doctors don't think anything less of me. In fact, they appreciate that I'm saying, you know what, I'm struggling with this piece of calculus, because you know what? That same doctor will come in and get me and say, Katrina, I'm actually struggling to get this piece of calculus on the measle of 12. Like, hey, what are the chances that you could get in there and see what you can do? And that's just the culture in our practice. We're not embarrassed by it. We're comfortable enough in our own skills and talents to know that, hey, I need to lean on you. I need to look to you for some support. But I think it would be amazing if dentistry as a profession got to the point. I mean, the reality is, I mentioned earlier, my sister's a surgeon. They do M&Ms. So for anybody in dentistry who does not know what an M&M is, it's essentially an opportunity for them to take a look at cases that have failed, patients who have died on the table. Right. And these doctors basically present this case before their esteemed colleagues, and they say, this patient, died, or, this patient, we had a major failure with this case. And I want to talk about what happened, and I want to get your feedback on what I should have done differently. The medical community does it all the time, right?
Wouldn't that be great?
Can you imagine? Can you imagine if doctors were like, "Hey, I can't get a closure on this margin. Like, what would you? It would be a completely different industry. But we're so closed up. There's a lot of fear of competition, I think. And ultimately, I think we're missing the mark. We're missing the opportunity to do better for our patients. That there's a lot of conversation that's not happening that needs to be happening. And I think, from a cultural standpoint, some of these younger grads that are coming out are already built with that dialogue. The University of Minnesota's done it. The dental students and the hygiene students take the same classes for perio.
That is where we went
Isn't
wrong.
it crazy? I know. This is
the moment we separated.
Yeah, exactly. Girls on one side, boys on the other. No, so they put us together, and they announce at the beginning of every perio, because we had to take like perio 1, perio 2, blah, 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 like whatever. So they put us in the same perio class. We're sitting in the same lecture hall with these dental students. And they even say, by the way, there are going to be 2 different curves. Who has the higher curve? The hygiene students, right? They specifically say the hygiene students are on a higher curve than the dental students. So when we graduate, and when those dental students graduate from dental school, guess what? They're already they respect that we are the periodontal experts, but also that, hey, we were in the same room together. There's already this, it's not the good old boys club anymore. There's a dialogue, there's a conversation, there's a mutual respect, for the hygienists and the skills and the talents and the gifts that they can bring to the practice. And I think that's just a huge way that, even from an educational standpoint, we've started to change the conversation for our patients and as an industry.
You have been fantastic. This has been amazing.
Thank you. I know. I love it.
I would love, if you guys have questions, maybe we can bring you back and do a Facebook Live after this launches and answer any questions, because I might not have asked all of them. And there might be even some that come to mind after the fact. But this has been fantastic, truly. Thank you so much for all of this information.
Happy to.
So I would love for you to tell everyone where they can find more Katrina. Where can they get more of this?
Yes. I love it. So you can find me on Instagram at the Dental Winegenist. You can also find me on Facebook, and I'm also there on at the Dental Winegenist. I'm on LinkedIn, Katrina M. Sanders, RDH, BSDHMEDRF. It's alphabet soup. But I think if you put in Katrina M. Sanders, you'll find me. And you can also shoot me an email, katrina@katrinasanders.com. You can find me on my website, www.katrinasanders.com, or you can find me at a local wine bar in Scottsdale, because now we're starting to open back up. This is another place you can find me. And find me at trade shows. This is what's so fun. You and Andrew are this way too, but now people, I'm not trying to be people know me, because that sounds so ridiculous, but I'm pretty on brand. If you see me at a trade show, I'm usually walking around, on the trade floor with a glass of wine in my hand. So find me at I'll be at RDH under one roof, find me and have a glass of wine with me or cheers with me. I'd love to see you. And seriously, if there's anything that I can do to support you, let me know. I'm here to be an open book and to really help grow the profession in any way that I can. So thank you to you for your time today and for having me on. I'm truly honored.
Oh, it was great. Well, definitely check out Katrina if you have the opportunity to attend a lecture, a speaking engagement, or even bring her in as a consultant for your practice. jump on that opportunity 100%. So thank you guys. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Well, I know that was a bit longer than normal, and Andrew would have had a mild hard tat if he was on that one. So I try to do those when he's not there.
I mean, how long are we talking?
An hour 20.
Okay, that's not terrible. Although it could be easily split up into 2 different episodes. Anyway, I'm just saying my thing.
Listen, there's just not enough weeks in the year. We have so much content. We say this all the time. Like, people are like, how do you find things to talk about? I'm like, I have so many ideas and people that I don't have. We had to move to Facebook and Instagram lives to get people on because we had so many things to say. So I know it could be split, but it was just so good that I don't, you know how I am. I'm like, let's give it to them. Like, so if they can listen to it in full and they can go do it the next day if they want to. Anyhow, it was so good though. Great job, Katrina. Thank you for being a guest. And I don't think we have anything else that we need to talk about.
Nothing happening at all.
I know.
I go back to work, by the way. I'll be back at work by the time you guys listen to this show.
I'm so interested to see how it feels about wearing like all the get up. And if you guys are back to work, we had like a little call to action. We would love to hear from you guys. If you go to our website, atale2hygienist.com, on the homepage on the very right side, there is a send voicemail button. And we just want to hear, like, how's it going? How are you feeling? You getting headaches every day, or are you just like a champion and you're so excited to be back? Like, we want to know all those things, like 1 to 2 minutes. You can tell us your name. You can leave your name out. It does not matter. We're just curious how it's going. We want to create a little compilation of that. So yeah, I'm actually excited to hear about yours, Andrew, because I'm not going back until July 6th.
Well, I'll let you know.
Yeah. I have about 5 or 6 face shields coming. So I'm going to create some videos on that. I have about 6 new high volume evacuation tips that I am going to test out. And I'm excited because I got twice as nice scrub caps that are autoclavable, which are very cool. So
Ooh.
I know.
Interesting.
I know. Yes. Great job, Deb Carrier, our buddy at Twice as Nice. I have her scrubs already. So I'm really hoping that works in the temperature regulating way that it does.
I would like to know how that goes.
Yeah, I'm never hot in, the office. So I haven't really had to put that thing to work. Mm-hmm. We're about to see. Well, good luck going back tomorrow, buddy.
Thanks.
Good luck to everybody that's going back. And if you have any thoughts or feelings, we'd love to hear from you. You can, again, rate and review us on any of your podcasting apps, or you can go to our show notes and click that easy little link. Then you can also go to atale2hygienist.com, subscribe to our newsletter. You can find us on the social medias, the Facebook and Instagram. You can direct message there. You can share because we do share the episodes on our Facebook feed. So you're welcome to share that to groups or any colleagues. They can listen right there, or they can go to our website. Whatever works for you guys. We try to make it easy for you. But we're really glad that you're here. You listened, you enjoyed. I have no doubt you learned a ton. And yeah, I guess we'll talk with you next week. Anything else?
That's it. Take care, everyone.
Awesome. Bye, y'all.